Hi there, everyone, and welcome to Community Policy Speaks, our podcast here at the Community Policy Forum. So, the Community Policy Forum is an independent think tank seeking to promote evidence-based and community-centered approaches to policymaking surrounding the structural inequalities facing Muslim communities in the UK. We attempt this through connecting policymakers with academic research and experts, and through providing platforms for engagement with diverse Muslim voices on areas of contemporary importance. So, Michaela Community School in Brent, North London, has been taken to the High Court by one of its Muslim pupils for banning prayer rituals. The school's head teacher, Catherine Birbal Singh, who has been dubbed Britain's strictest head teacher, said the policy was introduced last March, quote, when some pupils started prayer rituals against a backdrop of events including violence, intimidation, and appalling racial harassment of our teachers. The lawyer representing the pupil that brought the case, Sarah Hannett KC, told the court last month that the prayer ban had, quote, fundamentally changed how she feels about being a Muslim in this country, and described it like somebody saying they don't feel like I properly belong here. As a result, Hannett said, the pupil feels guilty and unhappy. In her words, it messes up her day. Hannett also said the policy was effectively, quote, a ban uniquely on Muslim prayer, as it stops pupils praying at a time as required by Islam. She explained the policy would not impact pupils of other faiths in the same way, such as a Christian child, quote, sitting quietly in the corner of a playground praying. It's important to note that the school is one of the highest performing state schools in England, and about half of its 700 odd pupils are Muslim. The head teacher claimed, we have always been clear to parents and pupils when they apply to Michaela that because of our restrictive building combined with our strict ethos that does not allow children to wander around the school unsupervised, we cannot have a prayer room. She added that it is a happy and respectful secular school where every race, faith, and group understands self-sacrifice for the betterment of the whole. So, on the back of this case, we'd like to discuss this issue of prayer and the banning of prayer in schools, linking this into related topics such as Islamophobia, mental health, and prevent. And in order to discuss these issues, we're joined by three wonderful guests. Firstly, Professor John Homewood. John is Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Nottingham. He was expert witness for the defense in professional misconduct cases brought against teachers accused of Islamifying the curriculum in the Birmingham schools. Together with Therese O'Toole, he is author of Countering Extremism in Birmingham Schools, The Truth About the Birmingham Trojan Horse Affair, and with Gurminder K. Bhamra of Colonialism and Modern Social Theory. With Dr. Leila Aital Hajj, John is also co-director of the People's Review of Prevent. Secondly, we're joined by Maria Mahmood. Maria is the CEO of Muslim Youth Helpline. MYH is a national listening service helpline providing faith and culturally sensitive emotional support to young Muslims in the UK through phone, web chat, WhatsApp, and email for the past 23 years. Last and certainly not least, we're joined by Majid Iqbal. Majid has been a qualified solicitor for approximately 20 years. During that time, he has worked in both private practice and the public sector, specializing in commercial and civil litigation and dispute resolution. He has also worked on the child abuse inquiry known as IICSA, and more recently worked for the government legal department on the Post Office Horizon inquiry. He took on his current role as CEO of the Islamophobia Response Unit, the IRU, in early December of last year because he has a passion for helping people and aims to grow the organization so that it can support as many people as possible. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's very important and topical discussion. So I wanted to come to yourself first, John. Could you please provide a general overview of some of the rules regarding prayer in schools? And secondly, leading on from that, why do you think there's been so much contention when it comes to this particular case?
The first thing to say, and in response to your description of the Michaela School and the statement by its head teacher that it was a secular school, there is no such thing as a secular school in England. All publicly funded schools are required to provide daily acts of collective worship and also to provide for religious education. And so that school should be providing daily acts of collective worship. Of course, under various aspects of human rights, parents can opt out of prayer, and pupils can themselves decide to opt out of prayer. In circumstances where that decision is made, it's usual for a school to provide alternative collective arrangements for those children. And just to give an example, the Humanists UK, who strongly support the head teacher at this school, have themselves supported humanist parents challenging collective worship in schools. Humanists, of course, are opposed to collective worship in schools, but they challenged the failure to provide alternative collective arrangements for humanist parents. So we can see that the school should have collective worship in place. They should be making provision for parents who opt out, which means they should be providing a space in which that alternative provision could be provided, and also supervision for it. That's what should be happening in under the law at the moment. Now, of course, the request in relation to providing prayer for Muslim pupils is not taking place at the same time as the assembly or collective worship is taking place. But it doesn't seem to me to be a very difficult thing to make arrangements for. And it's hard to see why a school should be opposed to doing that, given the understanding about the place of collective worship within schools. So for me, it's not simply an issue of the difference between private prayer that is consistent with some religious beliefs contra collective prayer rituals associated with Islam. The principle of collective worship is established in the law applied to schools. Now, one can say that many schools fail to follow the law in this respect. And indeed, it's quite likely that this school fails to follow the law in that respect. But that doesn't seem to me an adequate basis. Most people are secular, most people don't follow the law, for arguing that the law should not apply. And in fact, the provision that the law allows also be made available to Muslim pupils. And I think schools that understand these issues properly, and taking up the final aspect of that you would wish a pupil to bring their identity to school, their whole identity to school. Well, obviously what we're perceiving is that secular pupils or pupils from secular families would bring their whole identity to school. There's nothing about the school that's in conflict with it. Muslim pupils are being asked to make a sacrifice for the general good. That's what the head teacher has said. But of course, that sacrifice is not equal. There's no sacrifice if you're a secular pupil. But also, if the issue is one of how do pupils learn to interact with each other and so on, then one could also regard the visible presence of religion within school, when that represents an important aspect of the lives of children and, in a sense, their relation to their specific community as well as the wider community, then it could be regarded as a learning opportunity for all pupils. And schools which take a positive attitude towards these things argue that allowing prayer actually opens up a space for discussion and understanding across groups, and recommend readers look at the UNESCO rights respecting school approach, where among the rights that are respected are the rights of religious expression and observance.
Thank you, John. If I could just stay with you for a second, you summarized very clearly there some of the issues that come with banning prayer in schools. Why do you think, therefore, I mean, you've seen, particularly with right-wing commentators, right-wing newspapers, a lot of articles and columns that have come out defending the decision to ban prayer, and particularly the words of the head teacher. Why do you think there's been so much contention on this?
I think that's partly to do with the organisation of schools. For example, if we say the Michaela School calls itself Michaela Community School, it is not a community school in the way that would normally be understood, and would be understood under the operation of schools within local authorities. So Michaela is an academy school. There is no obligation for an academy school to engage with the local community. And indeed, there are very few opportunities for multi-academy trusts, that is, the wider set of schools with which academies are engaged, to address local their local communities, because unlike a local authority school, an academy school, as a member of a multi-academy trust, the other schools in the trust can be quite widely distributed on a geographical basis. And so what you notice is you would expect schools to engage with their community through understanding the nature of the different characteristics of that community, perhaps engage with people from local religious organizations, churches, mosques, and so on, and also to engage with parents on that basis. But what you see is that this school has a very authoritarian view of the relationship between the school and parents. Now, right-wing commentators are upholding the status of academy schools as independent from their communities, but they also seem to be upholding them in terms of when they breach aspects of the law. So it'd be interesting how the High Court decides on this matter. So even if the head teacher says, well, parents know what they're getting into when they choose this school for their pupils, that's not usually regarded as a satisfactory response in terms of whether or not a school acts lawfully, whether or not a school meets the recognized rights of children and parents, and so on. So I think this is a very worrying concern. It shows the sort of disregard of right-wing commentators towards equalities and religion as a protected characteristic and Human Rights Act more generally. But I would say it's not just right-wing commentators. I also would be concerned about liberal commentators. And I think Muslim parents and pupils are particularly ill-served by the liberal press as well as by the right-wing press, because the liberal press is opposed to religion in schools, is dominated by humanist and secular views. Now, one can take the view that schools should be secular, but given that they're not, I find it deeply worrying that liberals are also willing to say that a school that breaks the law is acting consistently with what most people wish, rather than, in a sense, saying school that breaks the law is a problem. If you wish the law to be changed, get it changed. And it's very noticeable that there have been lots of attempts to change the law about collective worship in English schools, and all of them have failed, and all of them have failed because political parties have difficulty because of the of the role of the Roman Catholic and education and Church of England education in meeting public education. And so what is happening, I think, is the issue of Islam and the issue of Islamic faith schools and the issue of Islam expressed within a school has become a moral panic lightning rod for things that both the right and the left, or the right and the liberals, are unable to promote by other means. And I think that's very worrying from the point of view of parents and children who just wish to get a good education, and an education that is sympathetic to them. Everybody would wish to send their child to a school that recognizes them and the nature of their commitment. So I think it's disrespectful to children, and it's disrespectful to Muslim parents.
I wanted to expand the discussion a little bit more and comment to yourself, Maria. So before, when I provided a brief overview of this case, the pupil that brought the case, her lawyer put forward the impact that the prayer ban had on her own mental health. As an expert within this area, Maria, could you please speak more to the impact that, for example, being banned from praying in school and observing one's faith could have on a child's mental well-being? And linked onto that, could you highlight the services provided by the Muslim Youth Helpline to support pupils in these kinds of positions?
Thank you, Gazim. John clarified that the school is an academy and so has a unique way of working or not working with the communities it is in. But essentially, a school is a community for the young people and their families. It is a space for learning and growing. And it's supposed to be a space where you feel safe and protected. And if you're lucky enough, your school experience and memories are of you being genuine. And as a community, you deal with the decisions for the betterment of your students. And the school didn't act as a community for its students. It actually othered the Muslim students. And yes, the decision was harsh, but actually the process and the approach was even harsher. I mean, you've got 300 pupils who you're asking to make a sacrifice, which when you ask a young child who is just figuring out who they are, trying to fit in, all of these big issues along with its peers, it's a very big sacrifice to make. And themes and typical concerns that come into the helpline around being or feeling excluded, or the idea of being anxious at school, they are very typical. You know, they come into the helpline in high numbers, and at our organization, we provide that comfortable listening environment where we provide emotional support to young people. And so this is why MYH came to fruition. You know, it was that there was this big gap that existed for young people, for young Muslims who needed specific support, a more holistic approach to include their identity, but to also to include other issues that they may be going through. For our helpline, we have 4 platforms, so you can engage with, you can call us, there's a web chat, there's WhatsApp and email, and it really depends on your preference. And then you're met with a support officer who gives you that space to talk and listen, and then guide you through some of those issues that you're going through. And it's so that we can build that community on that helpline with that young person. And our team members, they are trained to deal with any type of issue that comes into the helpline, but we're also trained to signpost to other services as well, because we realize that, yes, we are a listening service and we provide that emotional support, but you know, there is a next step for a young person. And in order for them to be encouraged to get the right support, or to continue to get support for their mental health, or whatever concern they're going through, that if we can connect them with other services, or the right service, I mean, that is one step closer to them getting continued support. And the IRU is one example of, you know, an organization that we work quite closely with. But we're talking about the case, the current case, and how it made young Muslims feel. MYH recognizes that not everyone is the same, and this is one of the reasons why, you know, it exists. That there is a need to support young Muslims in a particularly unique way, so that they can feel heard and listened to. And we don't want you to sacrifice aspects of your identity in order to fit in. And what young people find is that when they go to get help from alternative services, that they may not feel understood, or just for the ease of that other service, or out of fear of a misdiagnosis or a misunderstanding, they actually leave or conceal some aspects of their identity out or their story. And so what happens is at MYH, you know that you're listening or you're talking to someone who understands your faith or your background. And so the idea is that you're able to be a lot more truer to who you are or your story. And then that way we can connect you to the right support services. Now, the Muslim population in the UK is very young. 47% of the Muslim population is 25 and under. And as a population, we are experiencing higher prevalence of common mental health disorders. And MYH did research recently, and we found that anxiety, depression, and stress were some of the most common amongst young Muslims. And our studies also show that actually only 52% of young Muslims had experienced depression, but hadn't reached out for support. And 37% said that they felt like there was no one to turn to. There are barriers to support services. There are barriers to access for young Muslims. And at MYH, we need to make sure that we are dispelling some of those barriers, so that young people get that support. Last year, MYH supported over 12,000 young people. And of those 12,000 young people, 40% of them discussed faith and religion on our calls. Now, faith is a protective factor for so many young people, so many young Muslims in the UK. We see that on the helpline. Yes, they discuss religious guilt as a concern, but majority of them are discussing faith as a protective factor. They're discussing faith that brings them back to where they wish they want to be, or an aspiring element of their identity. Now, if you take that away from young people, you're really, really taking away something that is uniting them, but also supporting them in their mental health journey. I mean, some of the largest signpostings that we do at MYH are to faith-based services. Young people are yearning for this. And when we compare some of the statistics that we find on our helpline to other services, and we work with a lot of mainstream support services at MYH, they are almost shocked that young people can articulate their identity alongside faith so well. When we talk to organizations like Barnardo's and Childline and The Mix and Young Minds, they know that this is a unique community that we work with. And in order to tap into those resources, they also want to learn so much more about faith and how faith plays such a big role in young Muslims. And so it is the way forward. It's not something that we should conceal or ask young people to sacrifice, because it is a huge part of who they are. It's a huge part of them developing themselves or getting that right support. And if other organizations or mental health support services are identifying this as the way forward to get that unique support for young Muslims, it's quite telling of the direction that we need to move in. And this school example is almost going the opposite way. It's asking a large group of young people to take that away from them, their daily routine, something that is embedded in their lifestyle at home. Once they come to that safe community space, it's no longer supposed to be there, because it's going to impede on the majority, apparently, of the school population. That also is quite detrimental to the young people if they are feeling like their faith can impede on the entire school population. The language that you use really is frightening for young people, and we hear a lot of this coming into the helpline when they are trying to understand where they fit in society, as Muslims, as young people, as a young person, as a young Muslim with a mental health condition as well. So they're trying to see where do they fit, and how they can be celebrated, but also help celebrate others. So school is a unique time for young people, and a school should be a community. And if you're not helping your young people be part of that community, it can be very challenging for young people. And we see that definitely on the helpline.
Thank you, Maria. You outlined some of the issues when it comes to mental health of young people and of perhaps the Muslim population and wider population generally, especially coming out of the pandemic as well. But the silver lining is it's great to see an increase in support services available for Muslim communities from organizations like MYH, like the IRU as well. So we're really hoping that in this podcast episode that people that may not have heard of either one or both organizations actually do learn a little bit more about your work and how they can access your services. So with that, I wanted to come on to yourself, Majid. Could you please tell us a little bit more about the IRU and how you can assist pupils and parents that may be affected by these kinds of issues, and whether or not you've handled similar cases at your time at the organization, just obviously caveating that with the fact that you've only joined quite recently, but in your experience, are these kinds of cases common? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Okay, thank you, Kazim. So I'll just deal with the latter point briefly and come on to it again. We have actually received one case recently in respect of a potential ban on prayer, but I think what will happen is a number of organisations and individuals will await the outcome of this hearing before then taking any steps to contact organisations such as the IRU. So obviously we'll wait with bated breath to view the judgment in as much detail as possible so that we can provide the support that's necessary for our organisations. So that brings me on nicely to the IRU, the Islamophobia Response Unit. I mean, primarily our position is to provide guidance and support to victims of Islamophobic hate crime and discrimination. So what does that look like, really? I mean, hate crime, briefly, it could be verbal abuse following a protest or just on public transport. Discrimination is often in workplace and in schools, either being dismissed in the workplace or disciplined for no justifiable reason. And in schools in particular, because I know that you inquired as to how we might be able to assist pupils who are affected by this type of ban. But not just this ban, obviously. In terms of the IOU, we do provide guidance and support in respect of a number of issues that children and young people have to deal with while they're at school. So just in terms of the IOU, just to explain, we have a 24-hour online reporting format, so that, and it's strange, we often do receive online reports in the middle of the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning, 12 o'clock at night, those sorts of things. So you can make a report via our website at any particular time. It'll come through to our inbox. Then we will review that, and then we'll arrange contact with the client, or, for instance, if it's a friend or a family member, we'll make contact with them and arrange contact with the potential client in order to take further information. We also have a helpline which is open 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. Monday to Friday. Unfortunately, the helpline isn't open on the weekends, but again, the voicemail facility goes into our inbox, so we are able to receive those voicemail messages over the weekend, for instance, and then we can pick that up and respond. So in terms of the types of cases, really, that schools cases tend to be, what we're seeing at the moment is a number of issues in relation to freedom of expression, for instance, in terms of support, say, for Palestine, wearing a Palestinian badge, or even wanting to fundraise in respect to Palestine. We're seeing that pupils are having their freedom of expression curtailed or completely restricted, simply just for wanting to provide support. We're obviously seeing cases of this nature where individuals are being prevented from, praying in their particular school. As I say, we've only had the one recently, but I think we will see a lot more. And then you get other areas again, which are, simply cases of Islamophobia, maybe teachers making Islamophobic comments and things of that nature. So in terms of the support, unfortunately, what we're not able to do is to bring court proceedings. But even if it's the case, for instance, that somebody were to be able to instruct a firm of solicitors to bring a case such as the one against Michaela, we could still provide support to that family in relation to that process. And that support would include, for instance, being able to discuss aspects of the case with the family. Sometimes you have a conversation with a solicitor. I'm a solicitor, so I know firsthand, you don't always understand exactly what's been said, or you get some written advice, you're not able to get hold of the solicitor to discuss it. So that's something where we can provide support and guidance in reviewing documents and providing assistance in that regard. But we can also help them to navigate the court process. The court process can sometimes be a very long-winded process. This one will be quicker because it's a judicial review, which is seen as very urgent and often dealt with much quicker. But sometimes cases can take, a year or two or longer. So we can help provide that support as the case proceeds. But equally, if it's not a case where claims actually being issued, what we can do is to start to support the family by providing initial guidance and advice, and then writing to the school on their behalf. And that might be by way of instigating the complaints process and helping them navigate that, or helping the family themselves to write the letter, working with the local community, and also signposting to other organisations, for instance, such as MYH, because we're conscious that as a support service, we're not just there to provide that sort of legal aspect, but we understand, the cause, we understand the difficulties that these clients face, and so signposting them to other organisations in line with ours, or if we can't help at all, referral to a firm of solicitors or another third-party organisation is important to the service that we provide. So hopefully, more people will become aware of the service that we can provide, and service of MYH and other organisations, and we can increase the support to individuals and families that really need it, especially at this particular time. As I say, when this case is decided, hopefully, inshallah, it will be decided in favour of the child. We can then provide that support and use that case as an authority to strengthen the position in relation to any of those issues raised by the children at a particular school.
Thank you very much, Majid. You draw on some quite interesting issues there, not just the prayer ban, but also, for example, the suppression of pro-Palestine activism in schools that has become particularly pronounced in light of recent events in Gaza. So coming back to yourself, John, as someone that is an expert on prevent, can we draw any connections between the banning of prayer in education settings, for example, the suppression of pro-Palestinian activism, and the prevent duty?
I think we can. They're at a slight distance from each other, but I'll suggest how they might be connected. So let's say the peculiar thing about prevent is that it regards, it's supposedly even-handed between right-wing and so-called Islamist extremism. But what's different is that right-wing extremism is not referred to a particular community and as being something that community is being addressed and represented as potentially dangerous. Let's call that community white English people. I'm a member of it myself. Let's then think what's different about the idea of Islamist extremism is that it's understood to be nurtured within a Muslim community. So you have both a concern about the individual who might be radicalized, but also about the community in which they're located. So prevent is not even-handed in how it approaches those issues. But there's also a paradox, and it's the one that Maria drew attention to, and that is, if you're thinking of what is protective of individuals, going off the rails or whatever you want to call it, then actually religion is a protective against that. And so the very thing that you represent as problematic amongst or potentially problematic amongst Muslim pupils, the fact that they are Muslims and their religious expression is, in a sense, what protects them from problematic behavior, whether that be drugs, knife crime, or let's call it, or violent extremism. That is missing in the context of white English pupils. That's one of the reasons why you have a problem of the so-called lone wolf extremism, because these are individuals seeking community online, finding a problematic group online. That's not the nature of the phenomenon that is being associated with Islamist extremism. So I think that what there is a fear of Muslimness, which is generated through prevent and is represented in the school. And so religious expression is seen as potentially problematic in the school. And of course, one of the factors about the changing demography in England, and if you like, the decline of religion within the mainstream white population, if I put it like that, alongside shifting an increase in the number of ethnic minorities and the greater religiosity of ethnic minority communities creates both a tension in terms of both conservative concerns about Islam and liberal concerns about religion. And if you notice, one of the indicators that people are trained to consider in prevent as a warning sign is looking for belonging. Well, of course, it's very difficult to see religious community as being about anything other than belonging. And if you make belonging a problem, generically a problem, you're going to have a fear of religious expression, and particularly a fear of religious expression if you've made that particular religion the focus of concern. So what I think, it's not simply that it's Islamophobic, which it is, but it's also contradictory in the sense it attacks the very thing that by providing identity. And I think Maria put it, very well. It also provides, solace for individual Muslim pupils. One of the things that comes out of studies about prayer is how children, this is prayer, whether it's amongst Muslim pupils or others, is that it's a moment of calm, it's a moment of reflection, and it actually grounds and centers the child in their experiences in the school. Why would you be opposed to something which contributes to a pupil's well-being? It's baffling, but I think you do have to see it in terms of the kind of discourse and fear of religion that is generated through the prevent strategy.
Thank you, John. I wanted to come on to yourself, Majid. I had a question for you in regard to this growing intolerance and wave of Islamophobia faced by Muslim communities in the UK, whether it's hate crime, discrimination, political exclusion. What do you think this case tells us about the wider climate of Islamophobia in the UK?
Well, it's clear to see that there's a rising anti-Muslim sentiment, and I would describe it as rising anti-Muslim hatred, in fact. Unfortunately, following the events in October last year, we saw a massive spike in cases referred to the IOU. In relation to our cases, what's probably more concerning is the fact that the case numbers reflect an increase in discrimination over hate crime. I say that's more concerning. The reason why I refer to it in that way is because individuals are being impacted in schools and in the workplace, and obviously that's significant. Hate crime is always going to be significant, but we've always had hate crime. Looking at the figures, 55 to 60% of our cases from October are made up of discrimination in the workplace and in schools, and only 30% from that period to now represent hate crimes. So I think that's a worrying trend. In terms of this particular issue, as regards schools, my view is, I'm not seeing any real justification for instance, a ban on prayer, not in this particular case, and not in the one that was referred to us recently, and certainly not a legal one. The arguments that have been put forward, I haven't seen the legal arguments in the actual case itself, but from what I've seen in the media from the head, this reference to social cohesion, suggesting that Muslim children need to sacrifice so that everyone else, including the Muslims, can live in a normal social life and understand how that social life is dealt with in adulthood. Well, in adulthood, we make up almost a quarter of the population of the world. So you're always going to work with Muslims. You're always going to be in school with Muslims. You're going to be in the public, transport with Muslims. Everyday life, you will see Muslims. So to take away what is critically our identity as a Muslim in being able to pray, I think is just ludicrous. It's not a justifiable practical argument. Neither can I see that it's a legal argument either. So in terms of, for instance, the religion is a protected characteristic, I think for these schools, and in particular, a ban on support for Palestine, even an expression of support such as wearing a Palestinian badge, when compared to the wave of support provided to Ukraine, and I have no issue with that, provide the support and for all of these types of conflicts, but allow people to express themselves in a way which is lawful, and doesn't restrict their rights in accordance with the law. It tells me that it's seen as less important, that religion as a protected characteristics. And I'll give you a particular example. Looking at the social media and the mainstream media in respect of this particular case, the Michaela case, which I don't want to focus on too much, but I've not seen many interviews where critical questions are actually put to the head. There's reference to the fact that her grandmother is Muslim, as if to say that somehow provides her with all of the insight that she needs to understand our daily lives as Muslims. But the focus in the media also has been on an allegation about the child at school, which, as far as I can see, is an unsubstantiated allegation, and we won't know anything more about that. Maybe even when we hear about the case, that this individual threatened to stab somebody with a knife, allegedly. So, firstly, that has nothing to do with the issues in the case. And secondly, that seemed to sort of vilify this individual when it has no impact. Even if that person were to have said something of that nature, which, as I say, is an unsubstantiated allegation. We've all said silly things when we were young, and we don't know the circumstance or the context in which that was said, and how does that impact her application for a judicial review in respect of the right to pray in accordance with legislation? It has no impact whatsoever, other than trying to vilify her. And again, that's an aspect of growing intolerance and Islamophobia faced by us Muslims. Why should we be faced with that particular issue? Well, all we're simply trying to do is in this particular case, the child is asking the school to act in accordance with legislation, and to allow her to pray during break times of all times, as if that would have some kind of substantial impact on the entire school. So from my perspective, again, with the IOU, we would seek to support as many people as possible with any of these types of issues, with the growing anti-Muslim sentiment, the difficulties in schools, the difficulties in workplaces, and with hate crime. And hopefully when this case is decided, we can then continue that support with a stronger legal foundation for doing so.
I think one of the things that's interesting about the case, and interesting in terms of the background to it, is the failure of the Equalities and Human Rights Commission to interest itself either in the operation of Prevent and its discriminatory character, or in the issue of religion more generally. Usually it deals with individual instances, and in some way this case is proceeding on that basis, the denial of the rights of the individual child. But what is interesting about it is that the EHRC has not wanted to act on the basis of what might be called the rights of a group or the rights of a collectivity. And it's very difficult to understand religious rights except that they are rights of a group and rights of a collectivity. So I think this might be a landmark case simply because it's dealing with an issue, and I do hope it comes out in the case, where actually the law enshrines a collectivity and a requirement, the requirement for collective worship. It doesn't represent worship as an individual's right to prayer. It understands that worship is an aspect of community, the community of fellow believers and so on, and is associated with the practices of that community. So I think it could be an incredibly decisive case, because you cannot fail to see that collective worship is central to what schools are about. and this is about the rights of Muslims to collective worship within the school. So I think it's going to be, I think it's quite a really significant case, and I think it's also significant for, in a way, breaking a barrier on around how religious rights and religion as a protected characteristic are seen. You know, it's not just about the wearing of symbols, you know, whether you can wear a crucifix or not in an employment setting and so on. It's about something that is very specific and almost, I would say, essential to the nature of religion, that it's about community. And that's where liberalism has a real difficulty in understanding community and the rights of groups, and not simply the rights of individuals. So I think we really should be watching this case.
Could I just jump in just very quickly on the back of that and just add a particular point, if that's okay, Kazim? So I just wanted to make a point again. In the media, there's been reference to the fact that there's been public money spent on this particular case. Well, I would say it's justified on the basis of what John just said. It's not just for an individual, but in terms of a collective or a people. But actually, as I understand it, it's a legal aid case. And a legal aid case doesn't just simply run on the basis of some individual rocking up and suggesting that they've got a really strong case and can we sue this school, can we take this action? Because it's public money, they have to justify the rationale for making the application. There has to be reasonable prospects in terms of the claim. Clearly there are, otherwise the legal aid funding would not be provided. So as well as it potentially being a landmark case, I think it's important to understand that it is actually a good use of public money. And if it was some other religion or some other issue, they would be shouting that people have the right to freedom of expression or religion. But just in this case, because of the anti-Muslim sentiment, it's quite the opposite. But I just thought I'd make that point.
No, thank you very much to the both of you. I wanted to end and give Mario the final word, actually. So you spoke about the work that Muslim Youth Helpline offers in terms of providing mental health support services for young people, for young Muslims here in the UK. I mean, just beyond that, as Majid mentioned, the IRU have received quite a few cases of discrimination, of Islamophobia from schools, from people in employment settings as well. What else can people be doing when they come across these kinds of obstacles to practicing their faith, whether it's a young pupil in primary school, whether it's a student at university, whether it's even a Muslim man or a woman in the workplace? What can they be doing beyond these services in order to aid their own mental health, in order to, I guess, regain that confidence that may potentially be lost when it comes to, for example, being banned from prayer? What can they be doing on a daily basis, on a practical basis, in order to help themselves? And for example, if I have a colleague or a friend or a member of family that's also experiencing this issue, what can I do as well in order to help them?
Thank you, Gazim. I mean, just in this on this call, we have like 3 unique perspectives. And what we can do in our own capacity is support and protect young people in whatever capacity we work in. For young people, for anyone regardless of age who is going through something like this and is anxious or has been confronted by an issue, is to talk about it and get the right support. There is support out there. There are people willing to help. There are in very unique channels at work, at school, outside in the community to get that help for that young person in particular, and to use these. In terms of personal growth and personal mental health protection, is to talk about it. It's not to identify yourself as the issue or the problem. And to get people involved, whether that is someone that you trust within the school, in your community, in your local mosque, a parent, a guardian, who can help you. Sometimes in these difficult moments, your mind feels very clouded, and you feel like you're up against this really high tide. But if you take it one step at a time and you start to draw out what those different channels are, you will find that there are so many people out there that are willing to support you and help you and guide you through these difficult times. No one is alone, and people are always there to help. But also there are unique channels for you as a Muslim as well. If you feel like you don't want to go to a mainstream support service, there are organizations like the IRU and the Muslim Youth Helpline who work with mainstream support services, but who also work uniquely with other Muslim charities as well. So remember that you're not alone and you're strong, and that you can overcome whatever challenge is in front of you with the right help and support. Young people are resilient, and you need to channel that in the right way. As young people, you yearn for a sense of belonging, and young people, especially in their teenage years, are trying to fit in, find a group, a space which represents them or even allows them to express themselves. And so it is a very unique period in their lives. And so as parents as well, we need to understand that. We need to open our ears and listen to some of their concerns. Sometimes parents see the concerns of young people and think, oh no, that's not exactly how it goes, or that's not some of the challenges that we went through. But it's very different being a young person today than it was when your parents or guardians were young and going through adolescent issues. So be very open to some of those new concerns that young people are going to, and do not shut them down, and try to rally together and get that right support for young people.
Thank you very much once again to our three brilliant guests, to John, to Majid, and to Maria for joining us today for this discussion. Do keep up with the work of both the IRU and MYH. Follow them on social media, visit their websites, see how you can access their support, and do spread the word. For anyone that may be struggling, do signpost them to these brilliant services. And also do follow the work of the People's Review of Prevent and of Prevent Watch, which John is involved in. Of course, keep up with the work of the Community Policy Forum as well, on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and do share this podcast episode and other episodes of our podcast far and wide. Thank you to our guests, and thank you everyone for listening.